The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
This is Kiwi is back for a brand new season with more inspiring kōrero from special guests including rugby player, father and role model TJ Perenara.
My family bring me joy. Rugby brings me joy too, but it's not the same joy as my family brings me.
And global dancer and choreographer Kirsten Dodgen.
For some reason, people think I'm very intimidating.
Listen to the new season of This is Kiwi, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in collaboration with KiwiBank. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, senior writer at The Spin-Off. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Do you think that Simeon and Wayne are locked in a battle of who can hate road cones more, who can destroy road cones more? Brown versus Brown, cone off.
Have you seen Wayne's video?
Yes, I love it.
No.
It's like a back of the Y clip.
I love it.
He's like,
I'm a full Wayniac now. I've gone full Wayniac. Kia ora koutou, this is Gone by Lunchtime. It's August the 7th, 2024. The days are getting longer, the air is crisp, the film festival's underway, and so are the Olympics. Ben Thomas, have you been watching the Olympics?
I've been watching the Olympics avidly. I'm a patriot.
Are you lying on the sofa deep into the night, surfing through the channels on the impenetrable sky interface?
Yeah, lying, sort of, the sofa having taken on my shape, sort of belly half exposed.
Good.
Takeaway containers around me, going like,
I love it.
Pretty poor time.
You are the gold medalist of New Zealand patriotism for me. Annabelle, have you been watching the Olympics?
Sorry, the what?
The Olympic Games, the Olympiad.
Never heard of it.
In Paris. Paddy, I hear, have you been watching the Olympics?
Yeah, shit, yeah.
Pretty good, isn't it?
Mainly the pole vault.
Love a bit of pole vault.
Love a bit of pole vault.
Love a bit of pole vault. A lot of, did you watch the pole vault incident, Bells, was he a Frenchman? He's a Frenchman, I think, with his, when he went over the thing, but he didn't go over the thing with his.
Well, if you're going to choose medals, I think he chose the right one.
Yeah. He said, I don't need a gold, silver or bronze. I've got a junk medal. Yeah. Okay. Let's begin. We're going to cover a lot. We're going to talk about the national conference, the mathematics focus, the parliamentary culture, the Karen Chhour staff. Let's begin, though, with a running theme of the 54th Parliament of New Zealand and the National Act New Zealand First Coalition, which is Crown-Māori relations. The last few days, Annabelle, we've seen a walkout at the Iwi Leaders Forum. Ngāpuhi walked out. I think it was mostly Ngāpuhi, maybe some others.
Ngāpuhi, Te Roroa and Ngāti Manuhiri.
John Key, who was a sort of guest of honour at the National Party conference, urged lowering of the temperature in the discussions.
Yeah, it
broadly.
reminds me of that John Farnham song, Take the Pressure Down.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen him do like an interpretive dance to that.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be
Would
good.
have really pepped it up, I reckon.
Just an idea. He could still do that on TikTok. But the focus this week has been mostly on 7AA, the repeal of Section 7AA in the Oranga Tamariki Act. And Tracey Martin, a former senior minister in the 2017 Labour New Zealand First Coalition, we mentioned her last time in relation to the Abuse and State Care inquiry, and that she was the one who urged Jacinda Ardern to upgrade it to a full royal commission. She was Children's Minister. She gave an impassioned submission to the Select Committee saying, don't ditch 7AA. I mean, what's 7AA, Annabelle? Tell us what 7AA is.
7AA was introduced to require Oranga Tamariki to build relationships with iwi because Māori children are overrepresented in state care. And technically what it does is it requires is it the CE or the CEO of Oranga Tamariki to report back to Parliament about how those relationships are tracking and how Tamariki Māori and care are doing. More broadly, it requires Oranga Tamariki, along with all of the other requirements in the law, to give consideration to the identity, the whakapapa, and the cultural needs of Māori children and care, because all of those things are key elements of well-being of Māori children.
Yeah, and the timing is opposite because the report that came out, the big Royal Commission report, included among its recommendations that there should be more adherence to Treaty of Waitangi. And that's what this section, which would be removed according to a element in the National Act Coalition Agreement, would remove. Ben, the line from the National Party, which I don't think necessarily was super enthused by this, but agreed to it as part of that coalition deal. The line from Christopher Luxon is, well, we don't want the Treaty of Waitangi obligation to trump what's best for the kid in a particular situation. But there doesn't seem to be any evidence that that has happened, nor is that quite what the Act says.
No, that's right. I mean, I think, as Annabelle said, there's some reporting obligations, and, it puts into words the idea that Oranga Tamariki, has to make, relationships with iwi. It was doing that before 7AA. It will continue to do that after 7AA. I don't know that it will lead to any significant change in practices. That's on an operational level in terms of, an organisational level in terms of those sort of cases that Karen Chhour and Act sort of talk about, where Māori Tamariki is sort of reverse uplifted from a foster home where they've sort of grown close with the Pākehā carers, and and then they're sort of returned to family. Those things happened before 7AA as well, and
they're very few and far between as well.
Well, in a sense, they are. I mean, I think the family has very significant rights, even under the Oranga Tamariki regime. A lot of foster kids, probably of any ethnicity, and whichever families they're placed with, are probably returned to undesirable situations. That's just the nature of it. I don't think it will have much tangible impact. I think its real effect is it's just part of this sort of rhetorical barrage.
So it's performative. Are you saying it's a performative measure?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's where a lot of the breakdown in the Crown-Māori relationship that I think is happening is coming from. It's coming from the sort of environment and just the sort of the general kind of sense, I think, of sort of disrespect or contempt for the treaty partner that's coming through from this government. So some of it I think is justified, some of it's probably less justified, but where it is less justified, I certainly don't think that the government is making much of an effort to kind of explain its position. I think one example is the planned reforms to the Marine and Coastal Area Act, in response to a Court of Appeal decision, which did have the effect of substantially lowering the bar for recognition of customary title in a way that, having been there when the Act was developed, certainly wasn't the intention of the executive. The intention of Parliament is another thing that, the courts discover from the text. But when you read the judgment, it's very unorthodox. It involves sort of this kind of surgical transplanting of bits of the Act into different bits of the Act to try and make sense of the court's judgment. But so what the coalition parties agreed was to sort of legislate it back to the position that was sort of understood in 2011. At the same time, they've also signalled that they're going to go further than that and start really kind of defining terms like continuous use and occupation and the kind of, prerequisites for gaining customary title And the effect of that could be to rule out a lot of claims that, even if they weren't expected, certainly would have been contemplated by the application of the Act in 2011. And the justification seems to be, they seem to be saying, well, the bar was set high because the rights are valuable. The bar was set high because Kiwis have an interest in the beaches or whatever. That wasn't why the bar was set high. The bar was set where it was because that reflected common law jurisprudence around the Commonwealth about customary rights, which is a common law concept. And Paul Goldsmith, just the way he's talked about the amendments. He talks about it was sort of legislated so that about 10% of the coast would be in customary title, but that was never meant to be a target. That was a very rough estimate based on where they sort of on first glance thought claims might be more likely to succeed. It certainly wasn't like a goal or a quota, and I think talking in that way is very unhelpful. And saying that you're sort of amending the Act just to make it harder, as opposed to actually reflect, where the jurisprudence in the Commonwealth is, I think is a mistake, and it does impact on the treaty relationship.
I haven't read the decision, but I think many would look at it and what they would say or see is that there seems to be a pattern where every time Māori go to court and win, those rights are then legislated away, which is how we ended up with MACA in the first place as a result of the foreshore and seabed legislation, where Māori won the right to go to court and test their rights to the foreshore and seabed, which Labour then legislated away through the foreshore and seabed legislation.
The question about the Tracey Martin intervention, which perhaps one of you can help me with, she's urging National to invoke the agree to disagree provision in the coalition deals. But that doesn't, I'm trying to work that out. I mean, in terms of, I know there's been a focus on maths lately, but surely if National, that would involve National abstaining and then the bill would fail. Like, am I missing something, Ben?
Well, it certainly would. But I think the other thing is 7AA is in the coalition agreements, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yes, I mean, you agree to disagree in those coalition agreements is for issues that aren't covered by those agreements. That's for working through new events. It's not sort of like... that was certainly the way that New Zealand first viewed pretty much everything with Labour, was they reserved the right to agree to disagree when Tracey Martin was in government. Yeah,
I mean it's sort of, I guess it gets complicated because when you look at the sort of the treaty principles referendum push from ACT, that there's a kind of almost implicit agree to disagree, and Nationals will support it through the select committee no further. So you get into that sort of weird dance.
But what does it say about the select committee process? Like if you've already signed up and agreed, and then you sit there and you listen to all of the impassioned submissions about why the government shouldn't push through this legislation, is it all just performative at that point? Well, and it doesn't really matter how many people submit about it.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's because it's right there in the coalition deal, and I guess there is. Obviously the option is available for them to renege on that, but that would create all sorts of chaos in terms of the governing arrangement.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBit.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
One of the protagonists in this reform is Karen Chhour, who is an ACT minister and who has been the centre of quite a lot of headlines in the last week. She gave an interview to Jenna Lynch for 3 News, Stuff Presents 3 News, in which she essentially said that she had been subjected to attacks and harassment within Parliament that were beyond the pale. Essentially that she'd been bullied. She particularly made reference to this idea that there'd been criticisms that she was not Māori enough. Where do you stand on all that, Annabelle? I mean, there should be a way to disagree and criticise that doesn't go in some of that, and I'm not. She didn't even specify who it was. She said the opposition parties, and I don't know, but some of the stuff that has happened in Parliament in relatively recent time, getting to that blood quantum stuff, and that seems to me to be kind of contemptible. What do you reckon?
I think there's no doubt that in the past, Karen Chhour has been the target of some really unsavoury, unnecessary comments. And I think back to the exchange between her and Kelvin Davis a couple of years ago, which he ended up apologising for. I didn't think that Maria Mino Kapakingi's comments about being a puppet for your party were particularly bad. I think that's sort of language that, unfortunately, we've become used to in Parliament. I actually listened to Karen Chhour's interview with Tova, where Tova was asking her some really important and pertinent questions that arose from the Commission of Inquiry's findings about boot camps, about whether isolation would be used, verbal abuse, those sorts of things. And Chhour became very upset and ultimately ended up walking out of the interview. And I think we have to be careful that we don't conflate unfortunate, poorly constructed comments that do amount to bullying with actually really challenging a very controversial policy which seems to go against everything that has just come out in the Royal Commission of Inquiry. And look, there's no secret that Māori women get a hard time in Parliament. Lots of people get a hard time in Parliament. But ACT doesn't exactly hold the moral high ground on these issues. If you look at some of the comments about people like Matiria Ture and Kiritapu Allen, I think it's interesting that Seymour doesn't support and is still not willing to use the process that was set up where you have, what's the name of the role?
The Parliamentary Standards Commissioner,
the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, and he says that, democratically elected MPs should be able to govern themselves. But democracy isn't just about elected people. It's also about, the other structures that go around it.
I was astounded to discover that the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner existed. I remember that being floated, but I don't remember it ever being sort of established.
Is it the same guy who's the supermarkets commissioner? Like maybe we just sort of job share some of these things. I don't know.
Well, I think it's Lynn Provost, the former Auditor General.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, the thing is, she's not in Parliament. This is not a job with an office that that you can go and talk to like HR. And I think Seymour's right in that sense. It's part of the problem that a lot of MPs, and I think a lot of ministers sometimes when they get into the limelight, sometimes struggle with, particularly if they've come from particularly structured backgrounds, is that they do sometimes struggle with the fact that there isn't really a referee for this stuff. There's in political argument, in the House, the Speaker will say, well, that's unparliamentary, and there's a pretty low threshold for that, and people will be made to stand and withdraw and apologise or whatever. And I think you'd probably say that Maria Mino Kapakingi's comments were unparliamentary, but at the same time, if you set them outside the House, totally fine in terms of political discourse. People are sort of portrayed as sellouts, puppets, all the time. I don't really agree that these aren't really comments about blood quantum. I think they're more comments about, culture, is somebody, you know, being more culturally true to their whakapapa, etc. You know, whether that's helpful or not, I'm not sure. But I think going back to, you know, what John Key said, and Christopher Luxon has sort of said, really without any effect on anyone for the last 4 or 5 months, in terms of sort of using more temperate language. You know, you certainly do see this kind of, and I think it, you know, dates back to the sort of Trump days, this real lack of moderation and restraint in terms of the language used on both sides of the house. And I think it is really unfortunate. But you know, again, there isn't a ref for this sort of thing.
Well, and it's not just the Karen Chhour stuff. There are other couple of recent examples, which included Julianne Gento marching over to the other side of the house and standing over somebody physically. Who was it? I can't remember. It was a national MP, I think.
Matt Ducey.
Yeah, Matt Ducey. And then also Tom McClay the other day, who made some kind of unacceptable comments,
You're not
for
in
which
Mexico
he later
now.
replied about.
Was that
Ricardo,
a 30-year-old Shortland Street reference?
Oh, do you think it was a Guatemala reference?
I think too, to be fair, some of the things that New Zealand First has said about Rawiri Waititi and Hana Rāwhiti Maipi Clark have been pretty below the belt.
The other thing, which sort of in a way seems trivial by comparison, is there's been this spat that's broken out about whether or not you can wear party logos in the house, you know, and it sort of got down to whether you can wear this particular pin or this particular ribbon or this particular sticker on your computer. And I just want to offer a suggestion that they should just absolutely open the gates to that and allow people to really, really dress up, or maybe like have one day a week where they go, like, you know, dress up like Olympic mascots for their parties, you know, in full colours, maybe with bobbleheads. I don't know.
I love that.
I mean, let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Yeah, those rules aren't new. They've been around forever. I remember people getting us to remove sort of rosettes and things many, many years ago. I think Trevor Mallard relaxed it for the pins, and that was a mistake. Can't let standards slip.
No,
you know,
no, that's right.
It's the thin end of the wedge. You know.
On one hand, it's kind of bizarre because we know that everyone there is a politician. We know that they're all there representing political parties. But what I found, and so long as you're not waving a big flag that's like blocking the face of the MP behind you, I don't see why it's such a big deal.
It does encourage people to be innovative. Like, didn't Rodney Hyde have that hilarious Heidi High yellow jacket that he used to wear? You know, maybe people could do. You know, can you colour your hair? Is that allowed?
It's a very good question. I think the issue sort of comes down to consistency. And when you go back and you watch the clip with Hana Rāwhiti Maipi and her notorious laptop, there actually isn't a Māori party logo on it. There's like Taiao and Toitu Te Tiriti, but not an actual Māori party logo.
Right, interesting. So it's just the colours, is it?
It was just the colours, and that I think that it was in black, white, and red. But you know,
I like Hana Rāwhiti Maipi Clark and her notorious laptop is, you know, that they're playing at 10:30 in the dance tent. That's going to be huge. The National Party conference, there was a little bit of the sense of, I popped out on the Sunday for my sins to the Dewdrop Event Centre in Manukau, and the heaters weren't working. It was quite funny. It was really cold, and everyone was dressed up in puffer jackets. It looked less like a party conference than an evacuation centre in some ways. But there was a certain sense of a workmanlike quality, but also we don't have to talk about the coalition partners. Thank God. We can talk about the National Party, and let's talk about Labour and the Greens as well. But,
like Rod Stewart vibes, I don't want to talk about it. That could have been.
Very much like that. I'm glad that we've got Rod Stewart and John Farnham into this podcast.
I'll see who else I can get in.
And it made me think a bit like, you know, Christopher Luxon, who has made this unprecedented coalition formation work to a certain degree, his speech is full of, you know, outcomes and all these sort of managerial things that he wants to do. And there's a certain sense of him just persevering as this almost technocratic, managerial, incrementalist leader, flanked by these ideologues and demagogues and all this sort of stuff, Ben, and just trying to make it work.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that is certainly where he's been successful. You know, when you look at the progress that is actually happening through a lot of those coalition agreements, as, you know, outlined in the quarterly plans, you actually see they're kind of they're ticking them off at a pretty fair clip, you know, thinking that we're only actually sort of 8 months in. Or is it 9, whatever, but... I certainly think that's been effective. I think the coalition management has been effective. I don't know that it's just Luxon. I think that, you know, Peters and Seymour have been very good in their staff as well.
Especially when you consider some of the rhetoric that had flown back and forth between Seymour and Peters. It is quite remarkable that that's held firm.
I really think that the Nats unwittingly kind of created the best team-building exercise of all for Peters and Seymour with their intransigence on the negotiations. And, you know, those reports of sort of Seymour and Peters getting together to kind of turn the screws on the Nats, you know, really seems to have improved the working relationship in government to the extent that actually you don't really hear much about friction between those two parties at all. You know, and those were people who said they would never sit around a table together. But you're right. What Luxon is really lacking is the vision thing, as Bill Clinton would say. John Key, you know, he was also not really a vision guy, but he did have, you know, he could kind of evoke the sort of New Zealand that people wanted, and he kind of talked about that in his speech to the conference. You know, a New Zealand where everyone gets along, and, you know, the classic kind of a fair go and that sort of thing. Whereas Luxon, it really seems to be we've got 20 KPIs to work through, and we're hoping for an uptick in Q3,
and we've got several turnaround projects that we need to complete.
Yeah, and it is very sort of chief executive annual results like. And right now he is a hostage to fortune in terms of the economy and the Reserve Bank, and because that is really still what is dominating the national mood. Maybe I'm an optimist, but even given the sort of polarization around the world, I tend to think that, you know, a lot of this stuff, including the kind of Crown-Māori relationship tensions, will ease once people are feeling better about their lives. They tend to be less fixated on minority groups that they feel are sort of getting one over them, you know, while they're failing to get ahead, usually very incorrectly. But yeah, you know, there's not a lot Luxon can do, but the vision isn't compelling. And I think this comes back to, you know, what you were talking about with the Iwi Leaders group pulling away, is that where something hasn't been stipulated in the coalition agreements, because of the fiscal situation, because of the tightness with money, and because of the workload in getting all this stuff done, you're not really seeing a lot of progress. You know, Luxon has talked a big game about getting money to the front line, iwi providers, bypassing Wellington. I don't know that anyone's seen much progress on that in any of the portfolios. So... and that kind of goes wider to, you know, Luxon's greater ambitions, you know, increasing trade, prosperous economy. Well, you know, what are the details behind that apart from trade delegations, you know? And he hasn't really sort of fully articulated that and kind of given people a vision of something better than what we have right now, which I think for most people is pretty depresso.
I thought it was interesting, just coming back to the Iwi Leaders Forum, that Seymour didn't attend, you know, after all we've heard over the last couple of years about wanting to have a meaningful discussion about the treaty and the principles of the treaty. I thought that he might take up the opportunity to go and meet with iwi leaders and talk about what's going on and have those debates and discussions there. The other thing that I think is interesting about Iwi Leaders Forum is that when Key was in power, it sort of became the go-to consultation group for Māori issues, to the frustration of many Māori who felt that Iwi Leaders Forum didn't necessarily represent them. And, you know, as we saw, Ngāpuhi, the biggest iwi in the country, an iwi with 830 plus kids in state care, feel that they're not being heard there. So...
Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Ben. That's us for now. We will return with more scintillating Olympics commentary soon. Kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.